Welcome r/Prorevenge. Noisy neighbor gets silenced. Back in the 80s, I lived in a flat in southeast London. The flat was located in a small tower block 10 stories high with 4 flats per floor, one per corner as it were. The flat overlooked a local park and afforded very nice views of the area. The neighbors were generally very amenable, but everybody tended to keep to themselves, so no one had any problems with anyone. That all changed when a new family moved into a flat down on the 2nd floor on the same corner of the building where we lived. We lived on the 8th. They were not the most gracious of individuals, frequently leaving rubbish bags strewn around their floor's lobby for days, rather than depositing them in the communal bins, and parking their cars in other residents' allocated parking spots. In other words, the epitome of the appellati on chav. Complaints to the local council invariably fell on deaf ears. At about 11:30 p.m, I trotted downstairs and knocked on their door. It was flung open by what I could only assume to have been the male resident, looking somewhat the worse for wear. I politely asked him if he'd mind turning the music down as it was very loud, rattling the furniture in my flat and making it difficult to sleep. So I go back upstairs and call the non-emergency police number and explained the situation. They assured me that someone would be around in due course, being a Friday night. I reckoned it might take an hour or two. So, with much wailing and gnashing of teeth, we sat there waiting for the cops to rock up. Sure enough, about an hour later, I saw a patrol car pull up, and a couple of London's finest enter our building. A few moments later, the music gets turned down, and the police leave. No sooner had the car disappeared up the street than the music went back up to its previous level. We endure it for another half hour, no change, so once again I call the cops. This time it takes closer to 2 hours for them to turn up. Yep, definitely a busy Friday night. They finally arrive around 3 a.m. and once again the music is reduced to a sensible level. Unfortunately, shortly after they depart, back up goes the volume to its previous furniture shaking intensity. As you might imagine, by now I was royally pissed off. Indoors too, someone not normally prone to displays of anger was positively foaming at the mouth and looked like she was single-handedly going to reenact the Battle of Austerlitz in glorious technicolor, together with full orchestral accompaniment. It was then that I had a dazzling idea, one so fiendishly cunning and yet devilishly simple, a guaranteed cast iron, 100% pure, 24-karat stonker of an idea so brilliant that I felt certain that within a few minutes I could stop this once and for all and execute my plan in such a way as to make it impossible to trace back to me. Grabbing my toolkit, I crept down the stairwell to the 2nd floor just to double check the actual flat number. Having confirmed the number, I went back up to the 4th floor. In the stairwell just next to the exit door to the 4th floor lobby was a wooden access door that concealed one of the 2 electrical distribution panels for the entire building. The door was only secured by dint of a simple square key fitting, and the application of a large flat blade screwdriver would pop the latch no problem. Thus I opened the door to reveal the distro itself. Pulling the cover open, I was presented with a large panel containing 20 large 80 amp fuses, one each for the lower set of flats. Each one was neatly labeled with the flat's number and toss, but a moment to locate the appropriate one. Now, by one of those happy coincidences that usually only occur in the more egregious examples of the Hollywood B-movie, I just happened to have in my toolkit a dead fuse of exactly the same type and capacity. A few weeks previously I'd had to replace a similar fuse in the theater where I worked, and I'd absent-mindedly tossed the dead fuse in my toolbox where I'd promptly forgotten about it until now. Now, with all my ducks in a neat row, I pulled the fuse carrier for the miscreants flat out. Instant. Blessed. Silence. I rapidly swapped the live fuse for the dead one and reinserted the carrier. Securing everything back up again, I casually strolled back upstairs to enjoy a few hours in the hallowed arms of Morpheus. Addendum. Some weeks later, the troublesome family were moved out of their flat. It transpired that the local council had received so many noise complaints over the previous 6 months that they were obliged to rehouse them elsewhere. I did basically the same thing once. I had final exams at university the next day. The new tenant above me decided that was the night he needed to break out his new electric guitar. At 11 p.m., I called the manager and asked him to set the new tenant straight about late night noise. Manager couldn't be bothered, so I went outside to the electric box and flipped the unit's switch. The next morning, I flipped the switch back on before going to school. He never played the guitar late at night again. My brother did something similar when we were teens and our parents were out. It was unbearable, but my mum refused to do anything about it because my brother was her angel. Anyway, at the time we'd been learning how to change a plug and fuses and guides. So one evening, while he's downstairs, I head into his room with the Phillips and Ed fuse. Switch them over, plug back in, nothing to see here. The next day he goes mental. The stereo doesn't work. Mum goes mental at him cause he clearly broke it. Instead of checking the fuse like any normal person, Mum chucked the stereo out, but didn't have the money to replace it until after Christmas. It was blissful silence and no one ever found out. It reminds me of Operation Blackout. While at university, I was living in an old building which was all rented to students. The building was a little old and housed multiple flats. I was renting the downstairs flat and all electrical breakers off the building were in the lobby, right next to our door. The upstairs flat was having long championship style games of FIFA on their PlayStation that ran well past 1 AM during weeknights, and those guys were screaming and jumping quite loudly, bothering all the neighbors. I think you couldn't save mid-championship, so they wouldn't stop until they played all the tournament. So, we developed Operation Blackout. Basically when they were being too loud, me or one of my flatmates hold flip the noisy flat's power switch and enjoy their collective "no scream." They never learned to be quiet, but sometime later they left their flat door open and someone stole all their stuff. So, that was the end of Operation Blackout. Used to have to ask my neighbors to stop setting off mortars long after the 4th of July. Little baby at the time, kept waking up at 10:30, 11, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Finally one night, I took my screaming son outside and walked up to the house where they had hastily retreated. When my door opened, I banged on the door with my son screaming in my arms. They got hell from me as I invited myself in and asked where their crib was because he's not getting any sleep in his own house down the block. They stopped. The next 4th, they were still there, but they had sparklers. Townhome neighbors were really into loud, thumping, modern-y/screamy sex in their bedroom that shared a wall with mine. I beat on the wall a couple times to try and interrupt us their coitus to no avail. VCRs and rented porn bring a new thing. Okay, I'm old. Sue me. I hooked a VCR to my Marantz amp and JBL wall speakers, queued up the third-rate porn, turned the volume to just short of below the speakers, and went out for an evening of shooting pool. My posters had all fallen off the wall and my doorbell was broken when I got home, and I can only assume they chose either the ball gag or copulation in the kitchen thenceforth. Blessed relief. Late night party revelers. Had a similar situation years back. I'm a doctor who between never-ending nightmare shifts likes to sleep. Cue new neighbors who would play music loud enough to start shaking my bedroom 2 floors above their living room. I just turned it round. Benefit of working a week of nights at a time was that I leave to thumping music on a night and return in the morning with it continuing. The rest of my neighbors work daytime, so I had no guilt blaring loud music at 10 AM when they went to bed post-party. They stopped playing music so loudly after I did that a few times. Although I never got any revenge on my neighbors, at one point of my life living out of home, I had the displeasure of living next to a young family. Parents maybe in their late 20s with 3 kids old enough to talk, maybe 3, 5, and 6, that were either motor enthusiasts or had to leave the car on a little longer than you or I to get it started every morning. Sure enough, like clockwork, every morning at about 6 AM the male neighbor would get into his well-modified muscle and everyone knew about it. You know, on account of it being so fucking loud. Eventually I started wearing earplugs, made a world of difference. Best I did in a shared house during college, house split into apartments, was to turn the heat on during a weekend for the upstairs. In the summer, The entrance was inside with a stairwell or door below the stairs. Upstairs started after a hallway with thermostat in that hallway. They locked the thermostats. Ours was inside the actual apartment, but for some reason the upstairs was outside of it. It's a simple key which I had because my father's master electrician and installed these. I asked for one for a previous apt because calling the landlord to wait a day to turn the heat/air up/down 122 degrees was silly, considering we paid for that from our electrical bill. Anyways, the landlord made it a point that weekend they were gone for 5 days. So when I heard them all go out and talking about buying the food/alcohol earlier in the evening, so I went up and flipped it from air to heat. Was 1990s, so options were heat/off/air. Then I turned it up some to make sure it would be warm, but not blazing hot. They made it until like 1 AM, then people left because it was too hot. My roommates didn't know until a few months later when I told them. I didn't want them to blab under a few beers.